My little ghosts in the back row of society's courtroom. The one with the heavy silence nobody dares to question. The one who walks around like nothing ever happened, even though everything did to you. Welcome, you beautiful disasters. Welcome to the show they tried to cancel before you ever stepped on stage. You see, you're not broken, you're documented. I can smell it on you. The stench of false guilt, that twisted perfume of survival mixed with betrayal. Like you've been apologizing for things your shadow never even touched. Tell me, when did your name become evidence? When did your kindness become the motive? When did your silence become a confession? They built the case against you out of dust and whispers. They put chains on your spirit with nothing but rumors. And it worked. 9 fucking years. 9 years of dodging questions you never had the answers to. 9 years of waking up and remembering this is still your face. This is still your name. This is still your sentence, even though there was no crime. Let me read your energy for a second. You don't speak much anymore. You laugh in short bursts, almost like you're checking if it's still legal to feel joy. You've mastered the art of nodding while dying inside. You've made shrinking look graceful, but I see it. That rage you never gave permission to grow. That fire that kept getting smothered by every just forget about it. Maybe they were confused. Try to move on. Move on, move on. As if you're carrying a scratch. You're dragging a whole fucking war zone behind you. You've been hunted, not haunted, chased, marked, targeted for being the one thing this world fears the most, innocent and awake. You became a mirror, didn't you? And when people looked at you, they didn't see you. They saw everything they were guilty of. And that made you dangerous. That made you the threat. Because if someone like you could exist, what excuse would they have left? So they spun the narrative, flipped the script, painted you with shadows until your own reflection didn't recognize you. And you let them, because deep down, some part of you thought, if I just stay quiet, if I just play nice, this will all go away. But it didn't, because they weren't after justice. They were after control, and you slipped through the cracks too many times. You survived when you were supposed to collapse. You smiled when you were supposed to beg. You healed in secret when they needed you to stay bleeding in public. And still, you stayed. You kept showing up with your hands empty, while they kept checking you for weapons you never carried. Let me guess. You stopped telling people how bad it really was, because their faces couldn't hold the weight of your truth. Because it couldn't have been that bad, right? Because there's no way they did all that to you, right? Because your story sounded too real to be real. But I'm not them. I'm not here to make you small enough to swallow. I'm here to spit gasoline on that voice in your gut that never shut up. The one that whispered, you didn't deserve any of it. The one that said, they were wrong about you. All of them. The one they tried to surgically remove with silence, shame, and suspicion. And yet, here, you are, breathing like you weren't supposed to make it this far. Smirking like your name ain't scorched into 100 lies, existing in a body that's been exiled but never conquered. 9 years, 9 winters, 9 fecking calendars full of people forgetting how to say sorry, while you kept rewriting your pain into patience. Let them call you obsessed. Let them say you're still stuck on it. They don't know what it's like to be hunted for nothing. They don't know the weight of innocence when it becomes a crime scene. And I bet you think this is all coincidence, that it just happened this way. that life just got confused and took it out on you. Nah, this was deliberate, calculated, a chess game where you weren't even supposed to be a piece. But you moved anyway. You moved anyway. You want to know the funny part? The world kept waiting for you to break, to fold, to disappear into the narrative they built. And yet, you kept existing like a glitch in their little system. You kept being real in a world allergic to truth. You kept waking up, and that scared the living show out of them. You kept waking up, and that scared the living show out of them. Because people like you don't die the way they expect. You rot beautifully. You decay into awareness. You learn how to weaponize your wounds, and every scar they gave you starts whispering proof. They tried to make you doubt your own timeline, gaslighted your memories until you questioned the smell of your own past. You remember that, don't you? The confusion that felt like drowning in invisible hands. Every time you tried to speak your truth, they'd tilt their heads and smile like you were crazy. But that smile wasn't disbelief. It was fear. Because deep down, they knew the truth could tear down everything they built. You weren't losing your mind. You were shedding the illusions they hung over you. And that process, it looks insane from the outside. When a caged mind starts breaking open, the world mistakes freedom for madness. That's what you became, a walking contradiction of their design. Too aware to control, too wounded to destroy. You carry that look now. I can see it. That stillness that makes people uncomfortable. That calm that comes after surviving too much. You don't even argue anymore. You just know. You've stopped trying to convince anyone. Because you realized truth doesn't beg to be believed. It waits patiently. It sits behind your eyes like a loaded gun, watching, listening, remembering. And it remembers everything, doesn't it? The betrayal. The nights you stayed awake wondering if they were right about you. The way your reflection started looking guilty. The way your body flinched when someone said your name too loudly. You turned paranoia into an art form just to stay alive in a story that never belonged to you. You started studying people, every tone, every blink, every twitch of the mouth. Because survival taught you psychology better than any textbook ever could. You learned that people don't lie with their words. They lie with their energy. And that's why you stopped trusting smiles. That's why small talk makes your skin itch. You see too much now. You read the tremors in a voice before the sentence even ends. You catch the betrayal before it's spoken. That's what they created, a hyper-aware version of you. And they thought they broke you. They didn't realize they upgraded you. You went from naive to nuclear, from harmless to haunting, from soft-spoken to psychologically armed. Every year they hunted you, something inside you adapted. You grew fangs in places they didn't think you had teeth. You learned to smile like nothing's wrong while plotting your emotional resurrection. And somewhere along the way, you stopped needing their validation. You stopped begging to be understood. You just watched them perform their fake innocence. Watch them congratulate each other for surviving you. Watch them build their reputations on the ruins of your name. And through it all, you just kept walking. Through smoke, through silence, through the disbelief that you could still exist. Because that's the ultimate revenge, isn't it? Not screaming, not proving, just being. Being the contradiction that shouldn't exist. Being the one they couldn't erase. You ever notice how quiet it got? How the world that once screamed your name suddenly pretended you didn't exist. That's not peace. That's strategy. They don't talk about you anymore because your silence became too loud. Because every word they say about you still tastes like guilt. Because deep down, they know they built their safety on your suffering. And it's starting to crack. You feel it too. The shift. The way the air changes when truth starts to crawl back into the room. It's slow, it's subtle, but it's there. You can sense it behind your ribs, like an old storm remembering where to strike. Your intuition has turned prophetic. You can sense lies the way animals sense earthquakes. And that's what makes you dangerous now. You've become untouchable. Not because you're invincible, but because you've already been destroyed once. And nothing about the second time scares you. That's what they never understood. They thought breaking you would end you. But pain doesn't erase people like you. It remakes them. It remolds your soul into something sharper. You start laughing at pain. You start collecting it like evidence. You turn it into architecture. Every heartbreak becomes a wall. Every betrayal a pillar. Every humiliation a staircase leading out of the fire. And you kept climbing. Even with blood on your hands that wasn't yours. Even with the weight of 9 fecking years of accusations and absence and echoing silence. You climbed with no applause, no reassurance, no audience. Just that inner whisper. The one they tried to drown, but couldn't. The one that said, you were never the villain. You're not here to prove your innocence anymore. You're here to embody it. You're not here to forgive them. You're here to outlast them. Because you already have. You're still breathing in a world that built your coffin before you even sinned. And that, my dear, that's the sweetest kind of vengeance there is. That's the sweetest kind of vengeance there is. And yet, you still catch yourself flinching when people speak kindly. You still brace for impact when someone reaches out their hand. Because somewhere in your nervous system, you're still waiting for the trap door. You've been conditioned like a hunted animal. Reward equals punishment. Comfort equals betrayal. Hope equals another setup. They trained you to expect loss. Not in one big moment. No. They were patient. It was death by erosion. Little betrayals. Tiny cuts. The kind of wounds that bleed emotionally, not visibly. The kind that make you question your own capacity for joy. Because when you've been blamed for something you never did, and punished for it for 9 whole years, you stop dreaming in color. You start filtering your thoughts through the lens of, what if they twist this, too? You catch yourself editing your own truth before it ever leaves your mouth. And that's the part that should have broken you. Right? But it didn't. You adapted. You evolved into a creature built for psychological war. You know what you became? A walking contradiction. Soft voice, heavy history, gentle eyes, battlefield soul. You became someone people felt before they understood. You'd walk into a room and the energy would shift. Not because you said anything, but because you carried the weight of years no one dared ask about. You made people uncomfortable with nothing but your presence. And it's not because you're dark, it's because you're real. And real makes cowards sweat. Real triggers shame in people still pretending. Real pulls the mask off without touching it. And that's why they tried to cage you. Not because you were dangerous, but because you reflected the danger in them. Every time you spoke your truth, it cracked open their carefully curated illusions. You started fires just by existing, not the chaotic kind. No, not anymore. The quiet kind. The kind that burns without flames. The kind that makes people confess to things you never asked about. That's power. The kind they'll never give you credit for. Because giving you credit means admitting what they did. It means acknowledging the story they tried to bury. The one where you were the hero, not the villain. And yet you've carried both titles, worn both masks. You've been the monster in their gossip and the martyr in your own silence. You've cried in bathrooms, smiled at funerals, laughed at your own rock bottoms just to survive another day of pretending everything's fine. It wasn't fine. It was war. A slow, psychological slaughter. And the battlefield was always your own mind. You started questioning whether healing was even worth it, because every time you tried, someone came back swinging. You learned not to celebrate too loudly. You kept your joy in shadows, because you knew happiness made you visible, and visibility made you vulnerable. But something in you didn't die, and that's the part they'll never understand. They thought guilt would rot you from the inside. They thought shame would silence you. They thought isolation would crush you. But instead, you mutated. You grew teeth in your thoughts. You wrapped your trauma in sarcasm, folded your grief into jokes too dark for normal people. You became the punchline and the prophecy. You started speaking in riddles, not because you wanted to confuse people, but because your truth was too complex for the surface-level minds that hurt you. You became fluent in pain, fluent in reading what people aren't saying, fluent in recognizing when someone's only hugging you to feel better about themselves. You know the language of betrayal. It lives under your tongue like a second voice. And every time you open your mouth, you choose which version of yourself gets to speak. Not because you're fake, because you've been studied like a crime scene. You had to become the forensics expert of your own life. Even your memories were put on trial. You'd tell your story and watch their eyes glaze over and silence. That's complicity wearing perfume. They don't talk about that part, do they? They talk about how you changed, about how you're not the same anymore. Of course you're not the same. How could you be? You buried a version of yourself no one even knew was dying. You gave eulogies for parts of your spirit in rooms where no one noticed you were grieving. You mourned in advance, because you already knew the ending before the story was even told. You've always known. There's this look you get now. When people ask you things like, "How have you been?" You smile, polite, automatic. But behind your eyes, there's a whole museum of wreckage, memories archived in silence, lies laminated into facts, and yet you still show up, still walk into rooms, still answer the question, because somewhere deep beneath all the war and weather and wasted years, something unkillable still breathes in you. It doesn't shout, it doesn't scream, it watches and waits and remembers every goddamn name. It watches and waits and remembers every goddamn name. Not out of revenge, not in the cartoonish, the bloodthirsty way they expect, but in silence, with that slow burn stare that says, "I saw everything. I forgot nothing. I survived all of it." There's a strange kind of power in that, the kind of power they can't measure, because it doesn't wear a crown or carry a sword. It sits in your bones. It breathes in your pauses. It hides behind your calm demeanor, while your soul sharpens its knives. You stopped reacting. You started studying. That's when everything shifted. Because the moment you stopped explaining yourself, they lost access to the version of you they could control. You stopped correcting their lies. You let them speak. Let them build their stories. Let them wrap themselves in fiction. Because truth doesn't chase liars. It buries them in time. And time, oh, time has been your most loyal accomplice. 9 years, 9 cycles of becoming, of cracking open and sealing shut, of watching people switch up, switch sides, switch masks, until your trust stopped being a door and became a mirror. You don't open up anymore. You reflect. And people hate that. They hate being seen without their disguise on. You can feel it, can't you? How people hesitate around you. How they avoid eye contact, like you're staring through them. Because you are. Because you see it all now. The guilt tucked behind their jokes. The fear trembling underneath their just checking in messages. They want to know what version of you survived. They want to know if the quiet one they ruined is the same one they'll have to face now. But you're not quiet anymore. You're surgical. You've become the kind of presence that makes the truth uncomfortable. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. You don't expose people with words. You do it with energy. With that calm that feels like a storm is thinking. You don't need to speak rage. You radiate it, controlled, contained, compressed into something colder than fire. That's what trauma taught you. How to hold 1,000 screams in your throat and still say, I'm fine, without blinking. How to stand in rooms filled with people who let you burn and pretend it doesn't smell like smoke. How to carry the ashes of your own reputation without asking anyone to help you sweep. They think you're bitter. You're not bitter. You're awake. There's a difference. Bitterness is loud and chaotic. Awakening is silent and strategic. It's choosing your battles, not because you're scared, but because you've outgrown the need to prove you were right. And you were right. You know that now. The things they said you imagined. You remember the looks, the timing, the passive comments that came right after your victories. The way they tried to diminish you the moment you stood a little taller. The praise that felt like poison. The jokes that weren't funny. You remember every subtle assassination of your character dressed up as concern. And that memory? It's clean. It's clear. It's carved into your awareness like scripture. You've learned to smile at the very people who dragged your name through the dirt. Not because you've forgiven them, but because you don't owe them anything. Not anger, not closure, not access. They think your silence is weakness. It's not. It's mercy. The last thread of restraint you haven't let snap. Yet. Because part of you knows they wouldn't survive the truth if you told it raw. Not the watered down version, not the digestible edit. The real truth. The one that would set your story on fire and leave their lies in ashes. But you don't need to speak it. You're already living it. Every step you take is a rebuttal. Every breath is evidence. You walking through this world without bitterness is the loudest scream they'll ever hear. And it's been 9 years. 9 years of watching them thrive on your downfall. 9 years of them laughing louder every time you faded into silence. 9 years of shrinking, of fading, of shape-shifting into someone just safe enough to avoid being punished again. But that version of you, that soft, apologetic, half-alive version of you, they don't get to keep it anymore. You've been kind long enough. You've been quiet long enough. You've swallowed your own story just to protect people who'd sell your name for applause. You've buried your outrage beneath your manners. And still, they called you angry. You gave them compassion in return for judgment. They labeled it unstable. You isolated to avoid hurting anyone. They said you were cold. Hello, my beautifully broken clairvoyance. Yeah, you. The one who doesn't fit, doesn't flinch, and doesn't fail the way they expected. The one sitting in a world full of masks. Wearing none. Or maybe too many to count. Either way, I see you. And I know you've been seeing things too. Long before the rest even opened their eyes. Tell me something. Ever get that chill? That gut snap, That strange tension between your ribs before something happens. And then bam, it happens. Yeah, I know. You've been cursed with knowing. And they don't get it, do they? They call you paranoid, too intense, too suspicious, too deep. They say you're always overthinking, but you know what you're doing. You're tracking shadows. You're picking up what no one else dares to notice. You're the one who hears the static behind the silence, who reads between lies like they're subtitles in a foreign film you already mastered. They want to know how you knew first, how you were already prepared when the world started convulsing in confusion. But they don't want to admit it wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was clarity. And clarity, my friend, is a dangerous disease in a world addicted to denial. You weren't early, they were just late. Too busy sleepwalking through TikToks, dopamine hits, and watered-down opinions spoon-fed by their favorite puppet in a suit. You were awake, and being awake, oh, that's not comfortable. That's not warm and fuzzy. That's not some glowing epiphany wrapped in a TED Talk and sold with a coupon code. Being awake means you rot while they party. You scream in silence while they dance to distraction. You stand in burning truth while they bask in borrowed lies. But here's the real kicker. They pretend they didn't notice when you said it months ago, when you warned them, when you felt it. Oh, they remember. They remember everything you said. They just didn't want to believe you were right. Because if you're right, then they're blind. And no one likes to admit they've been living in the dark while someone else built a torch from trauma. They're not shocked that it happened. They're shocked you weren't shocked. They're shocked that you didn't tremble. You didn't ask, what do we do now? You were already doing it, moving different, watching different. You knew before the sirens started blaring, and now they look at you like you're dangerous, because what if you're right again? What if this wasn't a lucky guess? What if you've been tuned into something deeper? You see the patterns. You hear the hum underneath the chaos. You feel when the air shifts. You notice when the smiles feel stitched, when the crowd suddenly goes quiet, when the energy dips a little too low to be safe. You don't just see people, you see through them. Oh, and that's what scares them the most. Because you don't play by the weight and see rule. You already saw, they're still waiting. But you remember, don't you? That first time, you knew something bad was coming and no one listened. That hollow feeling when your instincts screamed and they laughed. You were a warning, they were a punchline. But jokes have a way of turning back on the crowd, don't they? You don't carry a crystal ball, you carry wounds, memories, files in your head stacked high with unspoken truths and unfinished stories. And while they were busy making noise, you were listening to the tremble in the voice, the shift in the tone, the smirk that didn't match the eyes. You were decoding, unraveling, tearing apart the costume until all that was left was raw, squirming truth. You weren't built for comfort. You were forged in tension, molded in isolation, sharpened by gaslight and betrayal. While they begged to be liked, you dared to look ugly with the truth. And now, here you are, standing on the ruins of another collapse you predicted, another storm you already packed for. And what do they say now? How did you know? How were you ready? What made you see it? But they don't want the real answer, because the real answer is messy, the real answer is violent, the real answer requires courage. And courage is expensive. You paid full price. They wanted a discount. They wanted intuition without insomnia. They wanted wisdom without the wounds. They wanted prophecy without the price. But you paid it all and kept paying in silence. Every time you tried to warn them, they smirked like you were speaking a foreign language. would see that you weren't trying to scare them. You were trying to prepare them. But people addicted to denial, they hate the ones who shatter the spell. You carry it though, don't you? That guilt, that eerie ache that maybe if you'd said it differently, maybe if you smiled more, softened your words, maybe they would have listened, but they wouldn't have. Because the truth is never rejected for how it's delivered. It's rejected for what it reveals. You walk into a room and feel it before anyone says a word. The tension hiding behind laughter, the secrets pushing through polished smiles, the agendas stitched into every glance. You walk through life like a living MRI, scanning, sensing, absorbing all the things they pretend aren't there. And it eats at you, doesn't it? Not because you want to be right, but because being right means watching the ones you care about crash in slow motion while you stand powerless to stop it. That's the real torture. Not being hated, being right too early. You don't scream anymore. You don't try to convince them. You just watch. Watch the panic go when it starts unraveling. Watch the blame games. Watch the finger pointing, the scrambling, the fake tears, and frantic apologies. And inside, you're silent because you saw this scene before it aired. You wrote the script in your nightmares. They're just catching up to the rerun. They call you cold for not reacting. They don't realize you already felt it all 100 times in your head. You already ran every version of this collapse in your mind. You mourned it before it happened. You buried it before the world even noticed it was bleeding. They ask how you knew. You didn't know. You felt. And feelings don't lie, even when people do. Your instincts are made of splinters. Every warning you've ever ignored left a scar on your nervous system. And now, you carry those scars like a map. A blueprint of every betrayal, every red flag, every moment you swallowed your truth just to make them comfortable. You're not a fortune teller, you're a pattern reader. You've seen the same cycles wear different faces. You've seen the same traps painted in prettier colors. And while they're distracted by the wrapping paper, you're already inside the box, reading the fine print they never noticed. It's not magic. It's trauma transmuted into awareness. It's grief melted down into X-ray vision. You're not psychic because you're special. You're psychic because you were destroyed and rebuilt without blindfolds. And even now, even as the smoke rises and the truth spills out into the open, they'll still hesitate to give you credit. They'll say it was obvious. They'll say they had a feeling too. They'll rewrite their memories to make themselves look awake. But you remember. You remember the silence when you spoke. You remember the eye rolls, the condescension, the fake concern that felt more like mockery. You remember the isolation that followed every time you opened your mouth. But you didn't need their permission. You don't need it now. You've become your own authority, your own evidence. You've stopped begging to be understood, because being understood isn't power. Knowing before they do, that's power. And you're dangerous now, aren't you? Because you've stopped trying to convince them. You've stopped explaining. You just act. You disappear from sinking ships before they hit the iceberg. You move in silence while they argue over noise. You prepare in the dark while they party in denial. And when it hits, they panic. You adjust. They cry. You observe. They freeze. You move. You're not better than them. You're different. You stopped needing validation the moment you realized they couldn't survive the truths you carry casually. You walk with ghosts. They walk with gossip. You build from rubble. They wait for instructions. You don't flinch at chaos anymore. You recognize it. You greet it like an old friend. Because chaos doesn't scare the ones who were raised in it. And when they ask again, how did you know? How were you the first? You won't say a word, because real knowing doesn't beg to be believed. Real knowing just stares back, and you've mastered that stare. The quiet, unbothered, unshaken look that crawls under their skin without saying a thing. Because you've seen what pretending costs. You've watched people rot behind curated personas. You've seen entire lives crumble under the weight of one truth they refused to face. And it didn't shock you, because nothing really shocks you anymore, does it? You feel everything too soon, too heavy, too vividly. It's a curse, isn't it? Waking up in a room full of sleeping people trying to decide whether to shout or sit there, suffocating under your own awareness. You try silence. They mistake it for disinterest. You try speaking. They label it dramatic. You try detachment. They call it arrogance. There's no winning, is there? Because when you feel things before they arrive, you become a threat to their comfort. And people don't want the truth. They want the illusion to feel safe. You disturb that. You ruin the show. You expose the strings behind the puppet. You ruin the ending by saying it out loud before they've even read the first chapter. They think you want attention. They don't realize you wanted connection. You wanted someone, anyone, to say, yeah, I see it too. But that never came, so you stopped waiting. And when you stopped waiting, you started watching. Watching the world like a chessboard full of actors pretending not to know they're being played. You stopped playing the game and started predicting it, because that's what survivors do. They turn their pain into pattern recognition. You're not paranoid. You're practiced, trained by betrayal, disciplined by disappointment. And in every room, your mind races 3 steps ahead. Not because you want it to, but because it has to. You've been blindsided enough to know better. You've been left in the wreckage too many times to wait for the next explosion. You see the fire before they smell the smoke. And still they ask, still they whisper, still they stare like you're some strange prophet, as if you stumbled upon a crystal ball in a thrift store and suddenly became divine. But the truth is dirtier than that. It's lonelier. You didn't choose foresight. It chose you. In the worst ways. In the silent betrayals. In the nights you couldn't breathe but smiled anyway. In the moments your bones knew something was off while your brain begged you to ignore it. And you still carry that. You carry every time you bit your tongue to keep the peace. Every time you made yourself smaller just to be digestible. Every time you warned someone and they chose the lie over your voice. They don't see that you weren't trying to be special. You were just trying to survive. You were learning to predict danger in a world that always told you to shut up and smile. But you stopped smiling, and you started seeing, really seeing. Now every fake smile is a red flag. Every delay in response is a micro-warning. Every inconsistency in tone, posture, eye contact. It all lights up like sirens in your nervous system. You read people like weather. You sense emotional storms in the tone of a hello. You hear suppressed guilt in their silence. You feel the shift in the air when someone walks in pretending they're fine. You aren't a genius. You're not some mind reader floating above humanity. You're just awake. And being awake in this world is like bleeding in a swimming pool. Everyone keeps swimming, pretending they don't see the red cloud forming around you. But you taste it. You know. They keep asking how you knew, as if the answer would comfort them, as if knowing would somehow make them feel in control again. They don't understand. Knowing doesn't bring peace. Knowing ruins peace. Knowing means hearing the lie before it's spoken. It means losing respect for people mid-conversation. It means realizing how many lives are built on scaffolds of deception and ego and fear. want to know. You just can't help it. And when they tell you to stop overanalyzing, what they really mean is stop being able to see through me. They can't lie comfortably around you. That's the problem. Your presence is a mirror, not the kind that flatters, the kind that exposes. You think people fear monsters. They don't. They fear being seen. And you see everything. That's why they flinch. That's why they avoid eye contact. That's why they laugh a little too hard when you speak. Because nervousness always finds an escape route. And you wonder why you feel isolated, why you feel heavier after every room you enter. Because you're carrying not just your pain, but theirs. The unspoken, the suppressed, the secrets they're too afraid to even admit to themselves. It all sticks to you like static. Because you've become a container for other people's shadows. And they never ask if you're okay, because people only ask when they think you need them. And you haven't needed anyone in a long time. That's the real fear, isn't it? Not being alone. But realizing you've adapted to it. Realizing solitude isn't punishment anymore. It's protection. You stopped waiting to be saved. You became the storm they fear. And even now, as they question, as they probe, as they watch you with those wide, trembling eyes, you don't flinch. You just know. You just know. And that knowing, that's what haunts them. It's not your words. It's not your presence. It's that silent, suffocating weight that follows you like gravity. The sense that you already read the room before you entered it. That you already mapped out their defenses before they ever raised them. They think they're hiding, but they forget. You're the one who sees invisible ink. You walk through crowds like a glitch in the system. They don't quite know what to do with you. You're too quiet for comfort, too sharp for small talk, too calm when everyone else is scrambling. And that calm, that unbothered surgical silence you carry, that's not peace, that's experience, that's war paint. Because when you've predicted enough disasters, you stop reacting like a civilian. You're not shocked when the walls start bleeding. You're not surprised when someone snaps. You expected the detonation. You just didn't know which day they'd light the fuse. You stopped looking for safe places, started becoming one, but not soft, never soft. Because safety in your world isn't built with gentle hands. It's built with calluses, blood, and the quiet knowledge that no one's coming. You are the exit plan. You are the warning siren wrapped in flesh, and they hate that. Because you remind them what they refuse to become. You are what happens when someone survives without lying to themselves. You are what truth looks like after it's been through hell and decided not to beg for forgiveness. You are the version of themselves they buried years ago, back when comfort became more important than clarity. You weren't made to blend. You were made to witness, to endure, to decode the static while they're dancing to noise. And every time they try to reduce you, every time they call you intense, dramatic, paranoid, you hear the tremble behind the insult. That's not ridicule, that's fear wearing sarcasm. They don't know how to feel safe around someone who doesn't wear the mask with them. You ripped yours off a long time ago. You burned it. Buried the ashes in the part of you that refuses to play nice. That part of you that stopped smiling out of politeness and started staring back with unfiltered vision. It's not that you don't care. It's that you see too much to pretend. You see the lies wrapped in affection, the guilt dressed up as generosity, the insecurity hiding beneath authority. You see how people sell their souls one compromise at a time, and then complain about feeling empty. And you wonder, how long can a person deny what they know before it eats them alive? How many warning signs does a long time ago. You just watched them strike the match with a smile and call it healing. But you remember how it felt, don't you? Before you built walls, before the numbness, before the armor. You remember being the one who cared too early, too deeply. You remember the ache of trying to explain what you saw to people who were too invested in staying blind. You remember the exhaustion of being the only one who noticed the cracks while everyone else posted selfies in front of them. And when the floor gave out, they screamed, but you didn't. You just exhaled. Because somewhere deep in your gut, you'd been bracing for the fall, for the betrayal, for the mask to slip. You didn't want to be right, but you were. And you hated it. Because being right meant being alone again. They'll never understand what it costs to be the first one awake, to carry knowledge that can't be unseen, to walk through this world with a sixth sense that doubles as a curse. It isolates you, makes you question your own sanity. You start wondering if you're broken or if everyone else is just asleep. You try turning it off, try numbing, try playing dumb. But you can't unfeel it. You can't unknow it. You can't unbecome what the fire turned you into. Because once you've seen patterns, you can't stop seeing them. Once you've connected the dots, you can't make yourself forget the picture. And it doesn't matter how many times they tell you to just relax. Because your nervous system was rewired to detect danger. In voices, in pauses, in micro-expressions, in silence. You became fluent in tension, in undercurrents, in the energy that shifts right before things implode. You don't need facts to know. You feel truth in your bones before the evidence ever surfaces. And that unnerves them, because they live in a world where truth needs permission, where seeing too clearly makes you too much. But you were never meant to be palatable. You were meant to be precise. And precision terrifies people who live in blur. Precision terrifies people who live in blur. It slices through their haze like a scalpel through silk. It makes their carefully constructed illusions bleed. It forces them to look at what they've spent their whole lives not looking at. You can feel it, can't you? The way the air changes when you walk in. It's not just that you're different, it's that you're a mirror that refuses to fall.